You and I have come to the point in Matthew where he's going to tell us about the Mount of Transfiguration. But what you might not know is this means a lot to your faith. And today, I'm going to show you. Let's dive in. So Matthew 17 begins with sort of an uncharacteristic time statement. Matthew's not very concerned with how closely things are related to one another until we get to this moment. Matthew 17, 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, his brother. I think the reason why Matthew is suddenly talking about time here is he's trying to indicate that we're moving closer to the death of Jesus. That's not one of your 3 to 5, but it does fit with something he said yesterday in chapter 16 and something he's going to say today in chapter 17. But he takes them up to a high mountain and he is transfigured before them. Now, why these 3 disciples? This is your first insight. A lot of people assume it's because Peter, James, and John are very close to Jesus, that they have a unique kind of friendship beyond just being his apostles. And certainly some of the Gospels seem to bear that out. But I would submit to you that there's another possibility that we need to stop and consider when it comes to the Mount of Transfiguration, and that is that these 3 men represent a unique service in the kingdom. James, the book of Acts tells us, is going to be the first apostle to die for his faith, whereas John is going to be the one that lives on well past the others, even probably into the 2nd century, if history is correct. And then Peter represents the one who in the previous chapter, having been given the keys to the kingdom, he's going to be the first one to step out and teach the gospel sermon in Acts 2 and the Gentiles in Acts chapter 10. So we're told that his face shines like the sun and that his garments shone like white light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them talking with him. Now, Moses represents the law. Elijah represents the prophets. But what are we to make of this? Jesus is supposed to be the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Peter even alludes to that in 1 Peter chapter 1, saying the prophets were writing about a person that they didn't know who he was or what time they were prophesying about and wanted to look into it. But there's something else going on here that I want you to see this really clearly. There is a tie by Moses and Elijah being there to the fulfillment of what God is doing. And it's through the law and the prophets. I get that. It's almost as if it's saying that Jesus is the fulfillment of all the promises that God made. And that's really a separate insight. But there's something cool I want you to, and this is not one of your 3 to 5, but there's something cool about this. You remember Moses didn't get to go into the land of Canaan because he struck the rock when he was supposed to speak to it the 2nd time? Moses is standing in the land of Canaan. I don't know why, but that just makes me really happy. It gives me chills to actually think about, after not being able to go in, that Jesus actually brings Moses into the land of Canaan. Isn't there just some symbolism to that? Doesn't it feel significant in a special way when you stop and think about that? Moving forward, Peter wants to build tabernacles for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah because, hey, it was good for us to be here. I'm glad we were here. And what happens? A cloud overshadows them, and they hear this voice. This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. Same words that were said when Jesus was baptized, plus the instruction to listen to him. Interestingly enough, and I hope you're journaling these, I hope you're writing these down, this blows away any thought that no other gospel other than John references Jesus being the Son of God. I know Muslims like to make that claim, discredit the Gospel of John, and then there are no claims that Jesus is the Son of God in any of the Gospels. Literally every gospel makes the claim that Jesus is the Son of God. God is making the claim that Jesus is the Son of God. It's a straw man argument looking for red letters that say it and that kind of thing. God says Jesus is my son. So when the disciples heard this, they fell on their face and on the ground and were terrified. And Jesus came up to them and said, and this could make a fun word study if you've ever thought about this. Hopefully you're journaling these statements in your journaling Bibles. There's more links in the description if you want to pick them up. It helps out the show to check them out. But look at what he says to them. Get up and do not be afraid. If you just go through the book of Matthew alone and look at all the times Jesus says not to be afraid, when Peter was sinking, right? When the storm was going to sweep over the boat. I know I did those in reverse order. Here, when God himself is speaking to them, there's something about this, do not be afraid, that there's something about the relationship that they have with God through Jesus that replaces the relationship that they had with God without Jesus, that we're being drawn closer. Verse 9, tell this vision to no one until the Son of Man has risen from the dead. Another thing I hope you're really tracking in your journaling. is all of the Daniel 7 references. Why? Because we get not one, but two. Because the next thing that Peter, James, and John ask him is, why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And he answered and said, Elijah is coming and will restore all things. Jesus is talking about the Old Testament prophecies that Elijah would prepare the way for him. And that's Malachi chapter 4. But not only that, he says, but I say to you, Elijah already came and they did not recognize him, but did whatever they wished. So also the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. I want you to see something. Can we just stop and appreciate some real spiritual growth in these men? I am in no way being sarcastic. You remember yesterday when he told them you don't understand, and that means you don't have the faith that you should, when they were worried about, oh, we didn't bring any bread for Jesus. And Jesus could have sorted out his own bread, right? He had that ability. But can we just appreciate their growth here? The disciples understood, so they asked him a question that, by the way, a great question. Who was the Elijah? Wasn't Elijah supposed to come before the Son of Man? They're asking an insightful question. That alone is spiritual growth. But can we just stop and be really proud of them for a second here? Then the disciples understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist. That is big spiritual growth on their part in just 6 days. It's awesome. It is so awesome that it seems like in Matthew's account, every time an apostle is speaking, it's almost without fail, open mouth, insert foot. That here they say something really insightful that sets them apart from the people who were following Jesus, but more to see the miracles that he would do. So that's really cool. But why is this story so important to your faith? I want you to see how Peter's going to use the transfiguration in 2 Peter chapter 1. In verse 16, it says, for we did not follow clearly devised tales when we made known to you the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. But we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. Here's why this story is important. For when he received honor and glory from God the Father, such an utterance as this was made to him by the majestic glory. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. And we ourselves heard this utterance made from heaven when we were with him on the holy mountain. Peter is saying, this is why you can trust that the things that I'm telling you all the way up into the beginning of 2 Peter, that this is the reason why you need to pay attention to what I'm telling you, because he's attaching it all to listening to Jesus, hearing Jesus, because Jesus is the Son of God. Back over into Matthew and looking at where this goes, we have this story of a man who comes up to Jesus, and Mark gives us a little more insight into this. A man comes up to Jesus. He's got a boy that's been demon-possessed. He says, Lord, have mercy on me. Then he culminates in verse 16, I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him. And Jesus answered and said, you unbelieving, perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? This is the third or fourth point now. I've forgotten which number we're on. How long shall I be with you? Bring him here to me. You ever wonder why Jesus is so put out with this request and the accusation against his disciples? Is he put out with his disciples that they didn't have enough faith? Is he put out with the man for the question? Mark gives us a little more insight. He actually tells him in Mark 9:23, all things are possible to him who believes, after the man submits to him that if you can do anything, is look, it's not on me to prove whether or not I can do it. It's on you to tell me, do you believe I can do it? And of course, the man says that wonderful reply, Lord, I do believe, help my unbelief. But why is Jesus so hard on this guy? Mark also includes the detail, and I would call this kind of subpoint number 4. Mark also includes the detail that the scribes were there turning this into a frenzy. The disciples wanted to know why it is they couldn't cast this demon out. Remember, they'd already been given power to do things like this, but it wasn't working, and they wanted to know why. Now, Matthew, you have this parenthetical here that some of your Bibles will notate. This is not part of the original manuscript of Matthew, but this kind does not go out except by prayer. Now, if that causes you some indigestion, you should know that Mark also includes that in Mark chapter 9, verse 29. And I don't believe there's any question over whether or not that was actually part of Mark 9. So it's something Jesus actually said. It says, while they were gathering together in Galilee, Jesus tells them, and here's another Daniel 7 reference, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day. So this is a sign of Jonah that he talked about in Matthew 12. It's a sign of Jonah that he talked about in Matthew 16. Again, we have a Daniel 7 reference to this being the Son of Man. 3 Daniel 7 references in just a few verses. Then we have this interesting story. There's a miracle attached to it. How often do you find money to pay the temple tax in the mouth of a fish? But also, you have Jesus in a veiled way talking about his identity. And so he asked Peter the question, would the sons of Herod have to pay a temple tax kind of thing? Do they exact it from their sons or from their strangers? Because the poll tax is the temple tax. But when Peter said from strangers, Jesus said to them, the sons are exempt, however, so that we do not offend them, go to the sea and throw in your hook. And so what Jesus is basically saying in a very veiled way is he's the Son of God. So I just think that's interesting, and what a neat way of saying that and making that proclamation, that declaration. I think we did about 7 pieces of insight. I just couldn't help myself from Matthew 17. So did you ever think about that and connect the Transfiguration to your faith? I hope maybe we opened some eyes on a few things today. And if you're journaling all this, I really hope your journal's getting full and that it looks profitable. Check out the links in the description if you want those journaling Bibles. And until I see you tomorrow to talk about Matthew 18, have a good day and God bless.